So wonderful. We are now YouTubing live again for this second session of the second global online event by Legal Creatives. We are here with Brandon, Gildea Barrister. Thank you, Brandon, for showing up here on video, on the live. Brandon Gildea is a barrister in Dublin, Ireland, and he is actually a technophile. He loves everything about technology, and this is actually how we met at the Web Summit in Lisbon this year. And so let me introduce Brandon just briefly before Brandon takes the floor. He's also a lecturer, and he's a tech enthusiast, IP specialist. He's practicing as a barrister. He's an amateur mathematician. And he's actually a big fan of what we do here at Legal Creative. And you've been following us since the beginning and very engaged, participating a lot. And we are very glad to feature you today to talk about time, money, and ethical issues for modern legal service deliveries. So the floor is yours, Brendan.
Thanks, Tessa. The starting point of this session or this talk is an allegation that can be put to all lawyers, that we're leeches, that we don't provide any goods or services of any intrinsic value. Instead, we siphon off the funds of our clients to the extent that they can no longer function and they eventually wither and die. Hopefully everyone listening to this can agree that the point of an effective legal team is to enhance the chances of survival of a tech company or of any client. And I thought a fairly helpful illustration of, just to start us the conversation really, is this screenshot from Alice in Wonderland, the wonderful cartoon version. It's a few years old now, but in a scene very near to the beginning of Alice in Wonderland, we come across the dodo. And the dodo in this scene is arranging all of these sea creatures and telling them to go round and round in circles so that they can get dry. And Alice blunders into the group, and because there's waves coming in, you can't see it in this version, but there are waves that come along every few seconds. Alice remarks to the dodo, well, it's impossible. How could one get dry using this method? And the dodo up on his pedestal there says, well, look at me, I'm dry as a bone. And I think this serves 2 points of analogy to what's going on in legal, I suppose, in terms of providing legal services to the tech sector. Firstly, the big companies, so the big 5 or the big 10 in your jurisdiction of law firm, could be said that they are above the rest of the lawyers, in that they have a steady flow of clients and that they're happy, and that the rest of us lowly lawyers are walking around foolishly in a circle, not getting anywhere. A different way of looking at this scene in terms of how it applies, or at least it should not be said to apply to lawyers, is that, well, our clients might often feel that they're sent on this wild goose chase, that, you know, the lawyer is there saying everything will be fine when everything is not fine. So moving on into the basics, mental ideas that hopefully we'll be launching into in this talk. Ethics, always a can of worms when one talks about the ethical duties. What are the ethical duties? And I suppose one example would be where you have founders, let's say the typical situation of, let's say, two men, one being a tech genius, the other man being the businessman, the man with the money. And as a lawyer, you have, when you're advising their company, so this legal entity, you have to be very clear all the time when you're trying to understand where the instructions are coming from, who is telling you what is in the best interest of the company. And the problem is, in a 50-50 equity share, such as in the example of 2 men or two colleagues, what if there's a disagreement? And a founders agreement, unfortunately, is something, well, whether or not it's unfortunate or not, we don't really have many reported cases in the Western world that I know of. Now, I'd be delighted if someone had an obscure Canadian or Australian case to point us to. But at the moment, big disputes, which we'll see later, often settle. So we have no real judgment. What we do have are the general principles that would apply to any company. So, you know, what you agree to is what you agree to as a co-founder, subject to a number of exceptions. Incubator system or syndrome is a phrase I've coined, where if you have a community of tech startups pre first round or even coming up to the second round of funding, incubator syndrome is where one company might be getting top. They might have a pristine data protection policy which costs them, I don't know, 4 or 5 figures to get from a big law firm, and then they share that, and everybody is happy. All of their peer companies are happy to, I suppose, hack or circumvent the need for their own legal team. The difficulty is that one size doesn't fit all often. Depending on the business. But also what we lawyers need to bear in mind is that these companies are talking to each other. And for better or for worse, if you are seen or if you get a name as being a company that is happy to take the money but is not available, well, then that's an issue and that word will get around. Similarly, then, if you do a good job at an effective rate and you're available and happy and pleasant to deal with, then hopefully that will increase your intake of clients. The SurveyMonkey image is there just to remind us that we have these brilliant tools to assist our clients, to help us take stock of the way we deliver our services. And also I've found, even going to Web Summit and using, a link on your phone or your iPad, and companies are fairly happy to fill in what they think is lacking generally in the provision of legal services. But my favorite part of this slide or this page is in the top right, this three, I suppose, modifiers, if you can call them that, when you're looking at in terms of what a client wants. So clients might have a budget, so that might be low. And as a result of that, that will either affect the quality or the completeness of the answer that you can deliver, and also the turnaround or the speed of your reply. Okay, so I suppose we're all familiar when we maybe book a flat or I don't know, hire a taxi or anything. You might have a budget in mind. I'd like to see that on I suppose LawClick when it develops this wonderful platform, and even the main websites of big companies. So moving on then, retainer agreement take an hour, and I'd love to have half a dozen examples through line by line. But for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to just look at just a few ideas, starting at noon, or the top center idea of time. Can lawyers bind their clients to them for a certain period of time? A 1 year or a 2 year contract, like maybe a phone deal or something like that? I think the answer to that is no. I don't think we can force our clients to stay with us for a certain period of time. So I don't think that's a particularly good or wise or even enforceable agreement. You might have this general understanding with your client that you'll renegotiate your billing at the end of their next funding deal. Okay, so you might they might require more expertise or more of your time, depending. But that's certainly a good opportunity to renegotiate and to, I suppose, evaluate the relationship. Equity is something that I'm very skeptical about lawyers taking equity in circumstances where, for example, a legal firm might have 20 or 30 companies on their books. What happens if one or two of those companies bid for a contract? There's clearly a conflict of interest. And then also the embarrassment that would arise if the lawyer makes a mistake and he has to go cap in hand to essentially his co-owners and say, well, I've made a mistake here. It is something that is gaining prevalence, certainly on the continent in Europe, particularly in Germany, but it remains to be seen as to whether or not this is a good idea. I'm very doubtful. This concept of a lien or a solicitor's lien in the common law jurisdictions is where it effectively operates as collateral. So lawyers have collateral against their clients, just upping and going to a new team. And the way that works is you have, as a lawyer, you have papers or you have certain information which needs to be handed over. It needs to be explained to the new legal team. And that is, I suppose, that leverage, let's say, you have in terms of if certain fees are owed, then you can assert that. Cash flow and payment is something, as lawyers, we're often aware of anyway with most of our clients, that when is the ideal time to get paid, and being realistic. Certainly if there's a development of an app or whatever of your service, if you're about to launch, you're not necessarily going to get any money if there are no clients. So just bear that in mind. The exit strategy, I think, being honest, it depends what stage you're at. Both the lawyer and the client should, being honest, have at the back of their mind this idea. When are we going to bring to an end our relationship? So what kind of exit strategy will you have in mind? And certainly as part of that, this handover, this time it takes to hand over all files to the new legal team is something that should be written into the retainer agreement. Speaking recently to some people in the sector, this concept of a flexible project agreement. So we need a human resources package done, and we don't want to retain you as a lawyer. We just want this one project done. Certainly, I would have my doubts as to whether or not that's advisable, because a lawyer might often spot something that is in the background but needs attention. Hopefully, we're not like the plumber that comes in and says we need to redo your whole house. But anyway, so.
And Brendan, let me jump in quickly, because we have a few comments here on the chat box. Okay. And by the way, everyone is invited and encouraged to participate in this conversation as well, and presentation live with Brendan from Ireland, who is, yes, a lawyer, because I said a barrister, but my pronunciation might have confused with barista. And I know we have this running gag, Brendan and I, about that. But anyway, coming back to the question, so we have one question saying, what about having clients as followers in a Facebook way or as fans? Can a lawyer be, quote, so good to be recommended? And another comment that lawyers should help businesses to create value. Do you have anything to say about those in relation to your presentation, Brendan?
I'm going to answer the first question first. Certainly, when you compare the legal service or the lawyer-client relationship to other services, I think there are some similarities. So yes, brand is important. Big firms have brands and they're getting very slick. This is our startup package. Like us on Facebook, please recommend us. So yes is the answer to that question. I do think, though, at some point, certainly members of the bar are subject to limitations. So for example, barristers in Ireland cannot advertise. So we're not permitted to show off. We're not, but the question of whether or not a Facebook page is an advertisement of one's services, I think there's a bit of grey area there. I didn't quite understand the second question. Tessa, could you repeat the second question?
Well, I think it was more of a comment by Sarah saying that she disagrees that lawyers are leeches. Sorry, my pronunciation. Yep. But then I would. Yep. And she said lawyers should help businesses to create value. And I believe this is also the objective of your talk, is to find a wise way that complies with the ethical duties, but also a creative way to better serve, especially startups who are into this very difficult time at the beginning with not so much funds available, but still a need for legal compliance and legal help. So anything you want to add in relation to creating value as a lawyer?
Yeah, well, I'd love to pause that question till the end, because actually that's exactly, hopefully, what the second half of the talk was supposed to be. I mean, it's the agreement. Really, what I'm trying to focus on is the agreement and what you say to your clients, what you can do and what you can't do. I mean, lawyers are not or at least it shouldn't be. I mean, like, let's say, for example, take KPMG as a company who provide an excellent kind of consultancy, one-stop shop for how you grow your business. And there is an aspect of legal nudges here and there. But the problem is that's different to advice from your legal team. So, and that, I suppose this is where we run into problems, or I don't know, maybe it's an opportunity for modern legal tech, maybe to have someone like a mentor on the books. But I'm actually coming to that if I can.
Yes, wonderful,
carry
Brendan.
on, if that's, is that all right?
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
So before we do that, though, lawyers always need to bear in mind, are you insured? And I'm certainly very interested in the developments in, let's say, online legal publishing. Where can you sue a publisher, a legal publisher, for advice or maybe non-advice that you rely on? So that's very, very interesting. When is one's insurance policy engaged? We can be disbarred as lawyers for certain behavior, certain activities. I think this is something that we need to bear in mind, and even tell our clients, look, if you have any complaints, go to the regulatory body and complain about me. And I think that's empowering for clients. The two examples here of when things go wrong here was, of course, Eduardo, depicted in the Social Network movie, where we don't know how much money he got, but effectively, my understanding is that he was asked to sign an agreement by the company's lawyers, and he wasn't told to get independent legal advice. And that was where his remedy grew from. So as a lawyer, if you're advising the company, and there's a very big document, you should be telling all owners of the company to get independent legal advice, because theoretically, if they don't, then whatever they sign can be challenged. And we saw this more recently in Snapchat and Reggie Brown's 157 million euro settlement. But moving on to exactly, hopefully, and the kind of thing, I don't know, Sarah, if you're a lawyer or in sector, but these three models are, I think, a good starting point when approaching a client and saying, honestly, this is how much time I can give you. And, well, what do you want from me, or what can I provide that will enhance value? Bearing in mind that lawyers aren't necessarily business strategists, okay? We don't, to a large extent, we wouldn't have I suppose, the ability to advise on what is a good business venture or not. We give legal advice, not. The slides are going to be available online, and for anyone who's interested, really the second part of the talk is geared towards, well, what kind of model, what kind of business model can we run? And I have three different possibilities, all of which I think are ethically grounded.
Wonderful. Do you want to go through them now?
The idea of the first approach is that what I call Model A is where you have about 50 clients on your books, and you have to resist the temptation to cookie cut your advice. So advice does not fit all, and one has to be aware that, having said that, if you've got a high turnover of client, then there will be a lot of repetition. You will be essentially giving out the same advice day in, day out, and because of that, your billable rate is arguably lower. It should be lower because of that. The advantage of that kind of model, or that kind of structure, is that you will get to a stage where, because of your high exposure to the basic issues, to what I would call the coal face, is that, I mean, you can, and there it is back again, you can really have a good idea of what the issues are. Model B then is you take on 5 clients at €5,000. You will give them how many? 66 hours. So that's over with maybe 2 weeks of your time, and the focus there is higher quality. So maybe the boutique, if you're in an aspiring boutique firm, you can do this. You will be charging a slightly higher hourly rate because you'll be getting slightly more specialized, slightly lower rate of repetition, and I suppose theoretically then you will get your 25 grand out of that. The last approach then is what I would call the waiting game. where you are effectively looking for that one client, that one blue chip client that will retain you. And for that, 250 hours, which I think equates to 12 and a half weeks. So if you're a one-man shop, that's a quarter of your year on this one client, or 6 weeks. The next slide then is just going through this in slightly more detail, but I'm actually happy, Tessa, to make these available. I've kind of covered most of the ideas that we have to avoid cookie cutting if you have a high volume of client. But you're upfront with them. You're saying, look, this is the maximum amount of hours that I'm going to give to you. And hopefully the clients will respond well to that. And if they want to go elsewhere, they're happy. You're happy enough to do it, I suppose, as long as they discharge whatever hours that you've done. And I suppose the ethical issues there, and it is an issue for the big firms that let's say the face of the firm mightn't necessarily be at the other end of a phone the whole time. So that's the challenge there, and you're flexible. Okay. The second type of, and I'll just do this very, very quickly, this high quality, this quality mark approach, where you only take on 5 clients. And as a boutique firm, this entails that you will be the firm that will be taking the test case, that you'll be challenging advice. You'll be, I suppose, even if you get a letter from a big 5 law firm, you'll be saying, hold on a second, this isn't clear, this legal issue isn't clear. And you'll be standing your ground on behalf of your client. You're available, maybe if you have your offices close, if not beside the biggest incubator in your jurisdiction, that would be good. And also being at the end of the phone there, either by mobile or whatever. And hopefully your repetition will get around a la this incubator syndrome I mentioned earlier. And finally then, this one client idea is something which maybe remind you of The Godfather, where he only has one client. But you do have to wait. You do have to, and maybe it sounds very bad, but you're really fishing for this one client. And what can a one-man team or a small firm offer? I suppose a client is that, well, you've got me for 6 weeks out of the year, and that's a lot of time. You could get a lot done in 6 weeks. You might spend half of that time at the office of your client and sucking up everything you need to know about their firm. And I suppose it's the kind of thing where, and I suppose we'll all have cases where, goodness, this only happens around big deals. We need to get a lawyer in, and there is a big time commitment. And it's one client at €100 per hour. And there you go. I'm actually going to go back to the slide, and I'm happy, Tessa, to make available both these notes and just some kind of links that I think are pertinent to the slide to sign off. And maybe if I can get around by replying to the comments in person. And thanks very much, Tessa, for the opportunity, and I'm going to listen into the rest of the sessions. So good luck, everybody, and I hope to see you in the Law Click or Legal Creatives community.
Thanks for coming, and we will be continuing now with Chris, the changing life of a lawyer. Stay tuned. We are coming live. Bye-bye.
Bye.